5 seasons, 110 episodes. A space station that changed what television storytelling was allowed to attempt. From a creator who mapped the entire series arc before a single camera rolled to a cast gutted by death, addiction, and personal tragedy before the finale even aired.
Special effects themselves are amazing.
And here I am for what I understand to be my last attempt at proving.
All right, Delta 7. Once we're in range of the distress call, stay close until we know what's going on.
Here are 15 facts about Babylon 5 that'll make you see the last best hope for peace in a completely different light. No one here is exactly what they appear. 15. Warren Keffer was forced into the show against Straczynski's will. The network wanted a hotshot fighter pilot. A young, conventionally heroic, demographically friendly character who could anchor action sequences and provide the show with a more accessible entry point for audiences who found the political complexity demanding.
Carti, I repeat, this is Zeta Squadron dispatch from Babylon 5 to investigate your situation.
Straczynski did not want this character. He fought the note. He lost. Warren Keffer was written into Season 2 against the creator's explicit objection. An externally mandated addition to a story that had been precisely engineered to contain exactly the characters it contained and no others. Straczynski's response was the response of a man who had lost an argument and intended to make his position clear through the work itself. He wrote Keffer into the season, then he killed him at the end of it. The network's character lasted exactly as long as the network could make him last. Not one episode more. 14. The show ran a genuine 5-year story about fascism, not as metaphor, not as backdrop, as explicit, sustained architectural dramatic argument, the Night Watch, the new Clark regime, the gradual normalization of surveillance and loyalty oaths, and the quiet disappearance of people who ask the wrong questions. Babylon 5 dramatized the step-by-step mechanics of how free societies surrender their freedom, not through sudden violent coup, but through incremental institutional erosion, through fear leveraged into compliance.
General Haig was killed in our last firefight. We were coming back from a meeting with some officials on Orion 7 when we were ambushed.
Through the moment when good people decide that looking away is safer than speaking. Straczynski was writing this in the early 1990s. He was writing from history, from Weimar Germany, from every democracy that had watched itself become something else, one reasonable-seeming concession at a time. The audience that watched it in 1996 understood it as science fiction. Later audiences recognized it as something closer to a manual. 13. Peter Jurasik and Andreas Katsoulas were never supposed to be that important. Lando Malari and Gakar were supporting characters. Background diplomatic color. Alien ambassadors positioned at the edges of the story to provide political texture and occasional comic relief.
Lie of omission. Is it not true that your own world has voted against taking any actions in response to the liberation of Ragesh 3?
That was the plan. Then Jurasik and Katsoulas walked onto the set together, and something happened that no casting process can engineer and no director can manufacture. A chemistry so specific and so electric that Straczynski began writing toward it compulsively, expanding their roles season by season, restructuring the show's moral architecture around a friendship rivalry that neither character was originally designed to carry. The greatest relationship in Babylon 5, the one that ends with two old enemies dying together, hands locked, unable to release each other even in death, was an accident. Two supporting players who were never supposed to matter that much. They became the heart of everything. 12. J. Michael Straczynski wrote 92 consecutive episodes alone. Find another example. Search the entire history of American television production. Every showrunner, every creator, every writer who ever held a series together through network interference and cast chaos and budget collapse. And find another example of what Straczynski did between seasons 2 and 4 of Babylon 5. 92 consecutive episodes, no writing staff, no co-writers, no room full of assistants breaking stories on a whiteboard while he supervised. Just one man, one plan, one deadline after another, producing the complete written output of a television series that was simultaneously attempting the most structurally ambitious long-form storytelling in the medium's history. He did not miss an episode. He did not share a credit. No one has done it before. No one has done it since.
Confirmed, Dr. Leader.
The record stands not because nobody has tried. It stands because nobody has been able. 11. The entire 5-year arc was mapped before filming began, before the pilot was shot, before the cast was finalized, before a single actor had read a single line of dialogue on a set that didn't yet exist. Straczynski had written detailed structural outlines for the complete 5-year story. Every major character arc, every significant death, every political turn, every revelation, the ending. He knew where Londo Mollari was going before the audience met him. He knew what Vir would become before Vir had spoken a word. He knew which characters would not survive and approximately when they would stop surviving. Television had never been built this way. Networks greenlit shows without endings. Writers discovered stories by telling them. Straczynski arrived with the complete blueprint and spent 5 years executing it in public, in real time, in front of an audience that had no idea how much of what they were watching had been decided before they sat down. 10. Michael O'Hare was secretly fighting severe mental illness. Commander Jeffrey Sinclair, the original commanding officer of Babylon 5,
They are alone.
the character around whom the first season was architecturally built, disappeared from the show after season 1 under circumstances that were described vaguely, explained inadequately, and never publicly clarified. The fan theories accumulated. The official statement satisfied no one. The real reason was kept secret for 20 years. Michael O'Hare was experiencing severe paranoid schizophrenia, episodes of psychotic break that made production increasingly impossible, that he was managing with medication and concealment, that he had asked Straczynski to protect from public knowledge for as long as he lived. Straczynski kept that confidence completely. O'Hare died in 2012. Straczynski revealed the truth at a convention shortly afterward, with the family's blessing, because O'Hare had asked him to tell it after he was gone. The man who played humanity's champion was fighting a war inside his own mind the entire time. He never let it show on screen. 9. The show was canceled and rebuilt mid-story. PTEN, the syndication network that carried Babylon 5 through its first 4 seasons, collapsed. Not declined, not restructured. Collapsed mid-run, while Straczynski was in the middle of executing the most precisely engineered long-form television narrative ever constructed. Faced with the real possibility that Season 4 would be the last, he made a decision that required compressing the entire planned Season 5 story arc into the closing episodes of Season 4, producing what amounted to 2 endings stacked on top of each other, a finale inside a finale. The 5-year plan detonated a year early out of necessity. Then TNT picked the show up. A 5th season was suddenly real, and Straczynski had to reconstruct from scratch story material he had already spent and aired and resolved for a season that now needed to justify its own existence. He did it. It cost him. The seams are visible if you know where to look. 8. 2 of its finest actors died far too young. Andreas Katsoulis played G'Kar, the Narn ambassador whose journey from vengeance to wisdom to something approaching grace across 5 seasons constitutes one of the great character arcs in science fiction television. Richard Biggs played Dr. Stephen Franklin, the station's chief medical officer, a man whose struggle with addiction and identity was written with a seriousness the genre rarely brought to those subjects. Both men were loved by the cast and crew with a specificity and warmth that comes through in every tribute ever written about them. Katsoulis died of lung cancer in February 2006. He was 59. Biggs died of an aortic aneurysm in May 2004. He was 44. The show that dramatized mortality and sacrifice and the cost of living with intention lost 2 of its best people long before anyone was ready. The cast that made Babylon 5 did not come through it whole. 7. Every major network rejected it. NBC passed. CBS passed. ABC passed. Straczynski spent years in development, refining the pitch, adjusting the presentation, walking into rooms where people with the authority to greenlight the most carefully constructed science fiction series ever proposed to American television, looked at the budget, looked at the complexity, looked at the 5-year outline that no network had ever been handed before, and said no. The show that changed television found a home on PTEN, a syndication network of such limited reach and institutional fragility that it collapsed before the show it had greenlit was finished. The most ambitious narrative architecture in genre television history was turned down by every organization in a position to give it the platform it deserved. It survived on the margins. It changed the medium anyway. That is either inspiring or an indictment, depending on how you feel about the organizations that said no. 6. Claudia Christian was written out over a contract breakdown. Commander Susan Ivanova was not supposed to leave. The character, fan favorite, emotional spine of the later seasons, the voice the show reached for when it needed to say something that mattered, was building toward a significance in Season 5 that Straczynski had planned and that the audience had been waiting for across 4 seasons of earned investment. The contract negotiation between Christian and the production broke down between seasons. The details remained contested. The outcome was not. Ivanova disappeared from the series at the exact moment her arc was ready to pay off, replaced by a character introduced in Season 5 who had none of her history and none of her accumulated weight with the audience. The loss was felt immediately. It was felt through the entire 5th season. It has never fully stopped being felt by people who remember what was supposed to happen next. 5. The visual effects were built on consumer hardware. The space battles of Babylon. 5. Fluid, kinetic, spatially coherent in ways that contemporary science fiction television had never managed. Were not produced on specialized film industry equipment by teams of effects professionals working on machines that cost more than the average house. They were rendered on Amiga and later Video Toaster Flyer system, off-the-shelf consumer hardware, machines that were available in retail stores. The Foundation imaging team that built the visual language of the show worked with tools that the film industry considered beneath serious production use, on a budget that the film industry would have considered insufficient for the ambition being attempted, and produced effects that set a new standard for what science fiction television was allowed to look like. They built the future on hardware anyone could buy. They just knew what to do with it in ways nobody else had figured out yet. 4. Straczynski planted seeds in Season 1 that flowered in Season 4. The 5-year plan was not a structural diagram hanging on a wall. It was active, woven into the texture of the show from the first episode, embedded in dialogue that sounded like color and turned out to be foreshadowing, present in character choices that seemed self-contained and revealed themselves 3 years later as pieces of a larger pattern. A throwaway line in a Season 1 conversation would become the key to a Season 4 revelation. A character detail introduced as background texture would return as load-bearing narrative. The show rewarded rewatching in a way that television had never previously attempted. Not because it was obscure or deliberately withholding, but because it had been built with the full knowledge of its own ending from the first scene of the first episode. Everything meant something. Most of the audience didn't know that yet. Straczynski did. He always did. 3. Straczynski invented the modern showrunner-fan relationship before social media, before Twitter and Reddit, and the entire infrastructure of real-time creator-audience conversation that defines how prestige television is consumed and discussed today. Before any of that existed as a concept or a platform, Straczynski was on Usenet, posting, responding to fan theories with the candor of someone who had decided that the audience deserved to be treated as intelligent participants rather than passive recipients, acknowledging what worked, explaining what didn't, engaging with criticism without defensiveness, and with praise without sycophancy. The relationship between showrunner and audience that is now the default expectation of every prestige drama. The direct line between creator and viewer that platforms are built to facilitate. Straczynski was running that operation in the early 1990s on a dial-up bulletin board. He invented the role before there was a name for it. 2. Paramount launched a competing show. Months after passing on the pitch, Straczynski pitched Babylon 5 to Paramount. Paramount passed. Within a year, Paramount was in production on Star Trek, Deep Space Nine, a show set on a space station featuring a diverse crew managing political relationships between alien civilizations with serialized story elements that network Star Trek had never previously attempted. The conceptual proximity between the show Paramount rejected and the show Paramount produced was not lost on Straczynski. It was not lost on the fan community. It was not lost on anyone paying attention. Straczynski has been direct about his belief that his pitch material informed Deep Space Nine's development in ways that were never acknowledged. Paramount has been equally direct about disagreeing. The legal and creative dispute ran for years. Deep Space Nine became a great show. That did not resolve the question of how it became the show it became. Bonus fact: Straczynski collapsed when it was over. The invoice did not arrive until the work was finished. 5 years of holding a complete 5-year story in his head simultaneously. Every character's destination, every planted seed, every structural commitment that had to be honored seasons after it was made. 92 consecutive episodes written alone. A cast death managed in real time and absorbed into the narrative. A network collapse navigated without losing the thread. A secret kept for 20 years out of loyalty to a man who needed the protection. A legal dispute sustained in parallel with active production. When Babylon 5 ended, Straczynski crashed. The sustained creative and psychological pressure of what he had done presented its full cost only after there was nothing left to hold together. He has spoken about it with the directness of someone who survived something and needed to name it accurately. He built the most ambitious thing in television. It cost him more than television should cost anyone. From a 5-year plan every network rejected to a finale filmed 4 years before it aired. Babylon 5 was the most sustained act of deliberate television storytelling ever attempted. Executed by people who gave more than the work had any right to ask, and in some cases, more than they had to give. It changed what the medium was capable of. It paid for that change in ways the credits never listed. Which fact hit hardest? Tell us in the comments. Babylon 5 is open for business. It always will be.